Good morning, everybody. At the outset, I would like to thank all of you for accepting to be part of this video session on challenging cases in retinal surgery. And we have a galaxy of speakers who are going to present some excellent and exciting cases, which will stimulate a lot of discussion. I would like to welcome our chairperson, Dr. Dhanashree Deshpande Madam. Dr. Preetham is yet to join. He is co-chairperson and Dr. Rupak is convener along with me. We will start with video presentation by Dr. Abhishek Kothari, since he has another session at the same time and he has to leave after presenting his video and discussion. Dr. Abhishek, can you please start your video?
Good morning, Manish bhai. Thank you so much, and good morning to all the people present here. So I'll just begin 1 second. Yeah, I think it's visible. Should I start? Is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, screen is visible, but it's black. So
yeah, I just was about to start the video.
Yes, I think
so
you
I'll
can
start. Right, ma'am. So this is basically a kaboom that happened during surgery. This was a patient who had a submacular hemorrhage of this size, and he was given an intraocular gas bubble and TPA injection and anti-VEGF injection, but the hemorrhage moved down and surrounded the macula. So now we went in to operate. After doing a vitrectomy, this is we are injecting the TPA injection into the subretinal space. You can see the bleb rising very nicely, and this is the bleb completely encircling and just going beyond the margins of the hemorrhage. Now, at this point, this was a reasonably sized bleb, but then I thought that because most of the bleb is superior, even if all this blood hemolyzes, it will still be under the macula. After doing an FAE, I realized that probably this needs a little more fluid, or the bleb needs to be a little larger because, it's mostly superior. So then I went in again, I restarted fluid, went in again, I started injecting and to create a bigger bleb. And this is what happened. So this is in slow motion. There was an air bubble in the syringe, and, fluid goes in slowly, but the air rushes in very fast with the pressurized injection. And this is now me staring at what has happened suddenly. There is subretinal air, there was a blowout, and kaboom, there was a hole at the macula. So then I decided that, okay, let us proceed with the surgery. Let me see the extent of the damage. So we stained it with the trypan blue, and the lesion, or rather the tear in the ILM that we could see, was a linear tear. So this was the configuration. Now I had a strange, problem. I planned to do a ILM flap, but then the ILM has, come off from the edges of the hole also. So on the go, I started to think of how I can create a flap. So this is what I did. I started the ILM peel on top of the bleb. This must be the only case where you're peeling with air underneath you. So, so this is how we did it very slowly. This was all basically thinking on the trot. Nothing that you've seen or done earlier will prepare you for this. So first I started peeling on one side, and then I carried this to the other side also. And as I was expecting, so as I was expecting that the ILM was quite loose at the margin. So luckily I did not try to create a flap from the margin like we routinely do in ILM flap. So I decided that let this be a kind of a pedicle flap where the ILM comes from a little farther in. So this is the ILM peeling that I have done around the macular hole, and this was the flap that was remaining. And then this was a large flap. So I kind of, with a very low suction, I trimmed it with my cutter. Again, being a little foolhardy, but anyway, that's what I did. Then I did the fluid air exchange. And after the fluid air exchange, fluid air exchange got complete with the soft tip. And once I had completely dried the retinal surface of all the fluid, then I took this soft tip, but this time the soft tip is attached to a syringe which has the plunger in, so there's no suction. And with that, I positioned the flap over the macular hole, and this was the end of surgery. We left it with gas tamponade. So this is the post-operative picture after about 2 weeks when the air actually, I left it with air. So air had completely absorbed. There was a little bit of subretinal hemorrhage, which you can still see in the OCT. The macular hole is closed. And this was about 1 month after the surgery. The macular hole is closed. Patient eventually at 6 months has 6/12 vision. So I think I was lucky there to escape even after such a, I would say, surprising and shocking event that happened intraoperatively. Eventually, we were able to get a decent result. Thank you.
Excellent case, Dr. Abhishek. I think it's you are very lucky, and so is your patient that you got away with this. But there is a lot of skill that is involved in doing this. So I would like to invite Dr. Sangeet Mittal. He is one of our speakers, but sir does a lot of these macular surgeries for AMD. So, quick comment from you, please.
Two things I would like to say. One is, if you use an automated injection in this case, the chances of the macular blowout is less as compared if your assistant is pushing the TPA.
So we use automated, sir. We use automated.
Was automated. Okay.
But the only problem was that, when the fluid goes in, there is a little bit of resistance, but there was an air bubble which I had not noticed. The air, because it is compressible, it goes suddenly.
Suddenly, yes. And the second thing is like doing a ILM peeling, especially in patients in whom you are combining the TPA with air. After the injection is very difficult. So in those cases, I would plan to do a ILM peeling beforehand, rather than doing it later on.
No, the ILM peeling was not planned, sir. ILM peeling happened because there was a blowout.
But if, in your case, it's okay. But if you are planning a combination of air and TPA, then I think you should do an ILM peeling beforehand, because ILM peeling becomes very difficult when the air is below the retinal surface. I think, I don't know what others' experience is.
Can I ask Dr. DAD madam to give her comments on this?
This is a very interesting case, and I don't think this sort of complication has been reported, although people are doing subretinal TPA injections. So very interesting, Abhishek, to note this. What I would like to know is what was the etiology of the subretinal heme in this situation?
AMD, ma'am. AMD.
AMD, okay. So was it possible that maybe the fovea was already a little bit, damaged or not in a very healthy situation? There must have been some, retinal edema or something. Maybe that led to this kind of already a weakened macula, and that's why the fovea gave way. Yeah, had it been, say, a traumatic situation, maybe it might not have happened because you don't expect the fovea to be damaged. But maybe AMD caused it to give way. Yeah, good, very nice video. Enjoyed it.
Dr. Kshitij has a...
Yeah, so can I make a quick comment? A very interesting complication and very nicely managed, Dr. Abhishek. So of late, Disha and particularly Dr. Boral had initiated, and subsequently most of us are now following this. So of late, we have started using the cocktail mixture for submacular bleed, particularly the old one. And in that, what we are using is, we are using a mixture of ranibizumab along with air and the TPA. So the volume is quite large, and as you said, that towards the air has gone inside. So even I faced a complication like that, and luckily the hole was not subfoveal; it happened parafoveal blowout, because the amount of fluid and the air which we are going to push inside. So I waited for the second stage surgery, and they said we are going to take it up again. But yes, very nice.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but the time is running out.
Thank you, Dr. Kshitij, for your comments. Thank you, Dr. Abhishek. We will go on to next presentation by Dr. Kshitij Kumar. He is VR fellow from LV Prasad Eye Hospital, and currently he is a consultant at Disha Eye Hospital, Kolkata. I request Dr. Kshitij to present his case of double optic disc pit. You are muted. You are muted, Dr. Kshitij. You are muted.
Yeah, I have unmuted myself. Okay.
Can everyone hear Dr. Kshitij? Dr. Kshitij?
No, we can't hear.
Dr. Kshitij, you are not audible. Dr. Kshitij, are you there?
I think his internet must be a problem because the screen is also not moving.
Okay. I think.
Is it audible or not?
No, Dr. Kshitij, I think your net connectivity is a bit of a problem. Would you, should I ask somebody else to present while you fix things up there?
Dr. Kshitij,
Okay,
if you could switch off your video and try it, maybe it would help. Just keep your video off.
In the meantime, can I ask Dr. Unnikrishnan Nair to present his video so that he can fix things and come back?
Okay, so
Dr. Unni, are you there? Yeah,
I'm ready. Yeah, Dr.
Unni,
he has to unshare first.
Dr. Kshitij, can you please unshare?
Yeah, stop sharing. Stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unni,
yeah, I'm ready. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Unnikrishnan Nair, he is chairman of Chaitanya Eye Hospital, Trivandrum, and they have multiple branches in Kerala. He will be talking about complications that he faced in retinal surgeries, where there was a hemorrhage, unexpected hemorrhage, and how we managed it. Dr. Unnikrishnan Nair, over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Manish, for the intro and the opportunity. So at the onset, let me be very frank in saying that I tried my best intraoperatively to create these complications. While there were warning signs and during surgery, there's a tendency for us to overlook some of them, and that's why I want to present these things over here. So it's a video, and we'll just start off the video. So this is an injection of IVTA. So you can see I'm pulling the needle in and out, and the IVTA is obscuring the exact position of and subsequently after we remove the IVTA, a wonderful reddish glow is seen underneath and around the optic nerve. So this is a hemorrhage that happened during the injection of the IVTA. It was so small, so this was not managed, did not require to be managed. This is another patient where we are pulling an FP. There were 2-3 chances the FP gave me to tell me not to pull it, but I kept on pulling. And suddenly at one pull, you can see something happening. Okay, there is subretinal blood happening underneath the FP. That is, it's like a diversion of blood between the retina. And subsequently at that point, I started cauterizing and trimming the stump, which I could have done earlier itself, but instead of pulling it. And now this is the third video. I think something's got cut off over there anyway. This is the third video where I'm doing an ILM peeling, and here I just nicked the huge bleed happens. This happens because two things: the peeling of the ILM went out of the field of view or the visualization of the light pipe, and the curvature of the globe, the instrument went very close to the retina and nicked it. So here we've just done a bit of cautery. There's a danger of a major arcade being over there. We've done a bit of cautery to limit the bleeding over there. And subsequent to that, we stabilize and we're just doing a laser around that area. So this was a relatively, even though it was a large tear of the retina and a hemorrhage, we got off quite easily with that. So subsequent to the laser, we just proceeded with a routine fluid gas exchange and probably filled oil after that. Yeah. And it all ended well over there because we could do hemostasis. So the next two parts of this of the video will be about how we manage some disc bleeds with a few simple techniques. Yeah. So this is one way. So there's a persistent disc, and we put IVTA onto the disc to stop a disc bleed, and under FG. So IVTA, being a particulate substance, causes a particulate coagulation. This is another patient in which, as you can see, I'm pulling off a membrane. Instead of just trimming it, you just want some sort of. Sometimes we as surgeons just don't know when to quit, and you have a bleed over there. So what can you use? The first thing, you can use the pulled off FP itself to cause pressure on the disc after increasing the IOP. So the tissue is quite safe rather than an instrument. It's quite safe to use the same tissue and try to cause a physical tamponade on the disc to prevent bleeding. This is also with increasing the, after increasing the intraocular pressure, but it continued. So we continued with the rest of the surgery while it was still bleeding. And then you proceed to the typical, you do an FG to see if you can kind of limit the bleeding sometimes. And it doesn't work, a couple of more seconds. And again, in this particular patient, what we did in the end was we put a clump of IVT on it, let it stand for some time. And because of the particulate matter of the IVTA, it stops the bleeding. And when you take off the IVTA, as you see in this patient, the bleeding has clotted and it has stopped. So these are some very simple ways of managing a disc bleed, along with some of the complications, unexpected hemorrhagic complications that we see. So I think that's
Dr. Unni, thank you for that video. I think it's very courageous of you and Dr. Abhishek to show your complications and how to manage it. I'm sure you are very polite in saying that you have done all of these cases when there are others who will be operating and you will be managing the complications. Nevertheless, can I request Dr. Chetan Rao to give his comment about management of intraoperative hemorrhage in our retinal surgeries?
I think Unni has already answered his questions. He himself said that he had warning signs and he probably wouldn't have done it. I mean, for the video, of course, he's shown this must have happened just about by chance. But yeah, usually it's always better to avoid certain procedures than to try to manage a complication, because complications lead to another complication. It just prolongs and the surgeon anxiety takes over. So what he managed at IVTA was a very nice, quite a nice process. I mean, you just put an IVTA, it's a particular matter, it's a naked bleeder on the disc. You just cannot put a tissue there and close it. So best is to put an IVTA. Sometimes people also put viscoelastic and maybe allow it to just mesh with that bleed, or just increase the IOP till you see maybe the blood stopping, and then wait for it. And it just gets clotted. You don't really have to dislodge the clot. See, once it clots, and if you start again trying to remove the blood, again it will start bleeding. So you just leave the clot there. It will just lies over a period of time. At the end of the surgery, that's what Unni said was very correct. We don't know when to stop. So I think that is the only thing that we realize over a period of time. Sometimes leaving a clot on the disc and not trying to dislodge is good. The other thing was I would probably disagree with the Unni, where the same tissue he can use to tamponade that. Even with our cutter, the cutter, if you just keep it gently over that, it just helps. Not only in the disc, on the other area where you have just cut a tissue like the prolif. If you keep it, sometimes it just tamponades it well enough. And
really sorry to cut you short, sir, but the time is up. If you could move to the next presenter, please. Kind request. I'm really sorry.
Sure.
Can I ask next is can I ask Dr. Anshu Arora to please present his case of macular buckle with vitrectomy for myopic macular hole? Dr. Anshu is a leading vitreoretinal surgeon from Noida. He is a fellow from Shankar Netralaya, Chennai. He'll be presenting his case. Dr. Anshu, please proceed with your video.
Yeah, just a second. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
So I'll just share my screen 1 second. Is my screen visible right now?
No.
Not yet. Trying to share. Is it visible now?
It's visible now. It's visible now. You can get started, sir.
Right. So this was a case of a macular hole in a myopic individual. And to add to the complications, the patient had a posterior subpapilloma and a foveal detachment. And to add to that, it was the patient had retinitis pigmentosa. So we were dealing actually with a unique case which had retinitis pigmentosa along with macular hole and along with posterior subpapilloma of the high myope, the odds of which is very less to find such a case. So this was the presentation when a 60-year-old lady presented with diminution of vision of 2 months duration, nyctalopia since childhood. Vision was 2/60 on presentation. Clinically, she was high myope and now pseudophakic, had RP and a full thickness macular hole. OCT, as you can see on the screen, suggested a large staphyloма, type 1 staphyloma with full thickness macular hole, macular schisis, and a foveolar detachment. So at this time, we are dealing with multiple aims to achieve, multiple objectives to fight with. They are treating all these things together. I'll come to the video now, that how I proceeded with the case. Is the video?
It's visible, Dr. Anshu. Please go ahead.
Is it audible also?
Sorry?
No, sir, the video is not
the video
audible. No, sir.
Okay.
You will have to, when you are sharing, you will have to click share audio also.
You can just give commentary so we can fit it in time.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll do that. So to start with, liberal 360-degree conjunctival opening was made. So basically a large conjunctival opening with large relaxing was made to accommodate the large buccal. And then followed by that, all 4 recti were tagged with cotton threads. Apart from recti, in this particular procedure, we had to find out the inferior oblique, and which was identified and tagged. This was followed by taking the Moran Devon implant and passing the 4 mm wide band through the head of the Moran Devon implant, and then the band was then passed through the inferior rectus, lateral rectus, and the medial rectus, and then the buccal was slipped under the lateral rectus and positioned well so that the head of the buccal is underneath the macula. The buccal is then secured under the lateral rectus by non-absorbable sutures, 5-0 sutures we use for buccals. And after securing the buccal at the right place, the bands are secured along the line of the muscle insertion in the superinasal as well as infranasal quadrants. After securing the buccal, then it was time to go in, and with a 25 gauge regular vitrectomy procedure, we did a complete vitrectomy. And then this was followed by, just forward it a bit, staining of the ILM and the peeling of the ILM. A flap of the ILM, since the hole was large in this case, a flap was ILM was used to plug the macular hole towards the end, and then the case, the conjunctiva was closed carefully as the buccal element is large. So this is how the surgery was done. Post 6 weeks post-surgery, the post-operative result was 6/12 vision. You can see a nice closure of the macular hole. You can see the flap of the ILM underneath. In fact, in the ultrasound imaging, you can see the head of the buccal so clearly under the macula. And this is the arm of the macular buccal, which you can see here. You can also see the buccal so nicely placed under the macula, and you can see the straight line here, which is depicting the end of the, end of the macular buccal. Thank you. Basically, I want to convey through this presentation that most of the time with such a picture, most of the retinal surgeons, they are demotivated to take up such cases because they think the prognosis is bad. But for the patient who has lost the peripheral vision and has subsequently lost the central vision, this matters a lot, and we should give a try with the procedure, which can help individually all the issues involved in such a case. Thank you.
I think that was a brilliant presentation, Dr. Anshu. Doing macular buccals is extremely difficult and challenging surgery. And you did excellent job and gave patient vision. Can I ask Dr. D.A.D. Madam to please give comments?
Yeah, I would also like to congratulate Dr. Anshu. It is an extremely difficult case and very well managed. You are very right in conveying the message that yes, even in a situation which looks quite hopeless, it is definitely worthwhile giving a try, and the patient may benefit with some good visual outcome of such a situation. So I don't have any much personal experience with the macular buccal. I generally would like to do ILM peeling even in such a situation such as this. But maybe I will, I will give the question to others who have, experience in macular buccal. They can take the discussion forward.
Dr. Chetan, have you, do you have any experience? Have you done surgeries with macular buccal?
I have done 2 cases, but generally when we have done the macular buccal, we have actually seen a large staphloma. And if we had, we didn't have a macular hole for that. We had a macular schisis. So we were actually treating the MTM, that is macular traction maculopathy, rather than the hole. In his case, I didn't see much myopic degeneration at the exact fovea, at that region. So just wanted to ask him whether could he have just done a routine myopic, routine vitrectomy with ILM peeling, and would that have helped instead of adding a macular buccal? In his case, I'm not sure about the staphloma size.
If you look at the staphloma and if you look at the shortening which the retina had along with the macular hole, I would best expect a type 2 closure in such case. The hole may settle down, but there's definitely going to be a gap looking at the posterior staphloma. That is why I preferred to, support the staphylomatous area, so there is further shortening between the gap for the macular hole to close more, in a much better way.
Do you have some kind of an algorithm to say how much is the staphloma, the depth of the staphloma should be before you plan putting a buccal in these, adding a buccal to these cases? Suppose the staphloma is very shallow, suppose a shallow staphloma, then would you still prefer to put a buccal there? Like, for example, some of the staplomas are, suppose at the disc edge, it starts a steep curve. And I'm sure that would be, you would have seen such cases, and those cases definitely have severe macular traction. And I would agree with you on that. When you put a buccal, you are actually relieving that. Versus something which is a shallow staphloma, where even a routine vitrectomy with ILM peeling would have helped. It's just I'm not done too many cases. I think Pradeep has done a lot of cases, but communications with him have revealed that he would look at the staphloma, the depth of staphloma, and then decide regarding putting a buccal along with the vitrectomy.
See, if the posterior curvature of the staphloma is right under your fovea, the highest point of the curvature, and it is looking a deep staphloma, looking like a deep staphloma, which you anticipate that the edges are not going to fall so well in that staphloma, then it's better to put the buccal.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely, and it seems to be a lot of the algorithms are not perfect, so it's a surgeon's experience and their decision making in that particular case.
Yeah, there is no actually no particular study which describe how the depth of the cephaloma where the macular buckle should be tried. But looking at this particular case, I felt this is the right place to attempt that.
Thank you, Anshu.
And ultimately, the patient did very well.
Thank you, Dr. Anshu. That was a very brave and excellent case. I think we have a lot to learn from Dr. Anshu on this. Thank you again for sharing. Can I ask Dr. Kshitij? He is back online.
Yeah, but the host has stopped my video. The host has disabled my video.
Karan ji, Dr. Kshitij sir का video थोड़ा सा play कीजिए.
Yeah, no, now I'll share my screen. Is my PowerPoint visible now?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
So is it audible now?
No, it's not audible.
No,
can you give comment?
Your internet connection, it's showing as red bars. So our suggestion would be you keep your video off, so at least we could hear you clearly, sir. That's just a request due to the internet connection.
But the internet is okay, fine.
Because we can see your face also lagging a little bit. So
the voice quality is good or not?
Run the video and
voice quality is good. I think you can try. If it lags, then we can switch it off. I think now it's good. So maybe it just picked up speed. So let's go ahead with the video and figure it out later. Let's get started. That's all.
Dr. Kshitij, could you give commentary along with this, please?
Yeah. So because parallelly my recorded audio is also playing.
It's not audible, so.
Okay, so this is a case of now is it audible? Whatever I am saying.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just go back a bit. So this is a case of there was a crisis detachment over here, and there was an outer retinal hole, and there were 2 pits. The patient had a best corrected visual acuity of 3/60, and a 44-year-old female patient. So now this is a scan through the superior pit, and we can see the communication between the perineural and the subretinal space here, and there was a hyperreflective membrane and the hyperreflective tissue. And once the staining with the tricot and PVD induction was complete, we first started with the removal of that hyperreflective tissue from over the disc, and then we removed the Elschnick's membrane to create a bed for the flaps to cover the pit. So this is the peeling of the Elschnick's membrane. Then it got extended over to the ILM, peripapillary ILM. Now then we started with the fovea sparing ILM peeling, creation of multiple ILM flaps over the chassis detachment and the outer retinal hole. So multiple flaps were being created, and mainly focusing on the cabbage peel technique. And now the flaps were left hinged to the fovea. And so we were left with this remnant ILM. So it was not possible for me to create a big flap to cover the entire disc. So what I decided was to make 2 pedicle flaps, one for the inferior pit and another for the superior pit over here. So once the completion of the pedicle flap creation was achieved, the wall of the ILM over the fovea was trimmed. The cutter kept at low suction and low cut rate. And following this, a passive fluid exchange was started. And subsequently, we started massaging the pedicle flap into the optic disc cavity and over the pit. So what I did was that slow tucking of the flap was done with a suction of the fluid from the nasal disc, so that the flaps automatically get hinged and get plugged into the 2 pits over here. And multiple strokes was done to push in the flaps into the pits. I'll just fast forward a bit. And you can see that towards the end, the two pits were covered by the pedicle flaps, and there was this fovea sparing ILM over the macula, and the hole got closed, outer retinal hole got closed. The fluid was still getting absorbed, and the pits were plugged. There was obliteration of the communication. And the vision had improved to 6/36 from 3/60, and OCT to the superior pit, we can see the flaps covering over here, as well as the inferior pit, as well as flaps inside the disc cavity. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a brilliant surgery, Dr. Kshitij. Thank you so much. We have Dr. Preetham Samant, who had joined from his OPD. Good afternoon, Dr. Preetham.
Hello. My apologies for joining late.
No problem. Could you see this case, Dr. Preetham?
I know. I just saw the last few aspects of the surgery.
Okay. Then I will request Dr. Rupak Kanti Biswas for his comments on this particular video. Dr. Rupak, can you please give your comments?
Yeah, first to congratulate Dr. Kshitij for the excellent surgical video. And this is the inward flap over the optic disc is actually the main way out for this, and outer lamellar hole is being managed it very well. So specific, I don't need to make any comment. So this is the way we should handle it. People have used a lot of other things to stuff into the optic disc pit, and ultimately we need to close that optic disc pit so that the fluid connection has been interrupted. I would like to have a comment from other panelists as well regarding the laser around the peripapillary area.
Dr. Neeraj, sir, can you?
See, actually, I used to see doing laser around the peripapillary area. I think it is not going to bridge the optic disc pit as such. Stuffing with the ILM or scleral plugs will be a better option. I think doing laser to the peripapillary area, that also in the papillomacular bundle, is going to damage all nerve fiber layer over there. And it has to be not a like light intensity burn. It has to be little heavy intensity burn if you're aiming for any adhesion formation over there. Generally, I don't do any doing what Dr. Kshitij has shown this in, putting the pedicle, ILM pedicle into the optic nerve pit, and I do try to stuff also during my surgery, not just putting it there. I do try to stuff over there.
Correct. And what we used to do earlier when the OCT was not very rampant at that point of time, probably it was done little, not knowing how much the gap between, the neurosensory retina and the RP. So even if you do the deep laser also, hardly any cases used to have effect. So what I mean to say is that closure is not that much of in a predictable way, as because you don't know the gap in between RP and the neurosensory in the peripapillary area. So I think this is the way out as of now.
You are doing, Rupak, that laser along with this?
No, not now. This was doing about just when the OCT was just came out, that period of time.
Earlier we were doing also.
Yeah.
Manish, can I have one comment here?
Yes, ma'am.
I agree with Rupak.
Can we stop the buzzer, please?
The closure of this leakage is unpredictable. Even after ILM peeling, and even sometimes putting glue also, the closure does not happen immediately. So you don't see a flat retina, and you don't see the leakage and stop from the optic pit at the glass appointment, or even 3-4 months after the surgery. I think over a period of few months, say maybe 6 months or even longer, the leakage can reduce and the maculopathy can probably settle down. But it is not seen immediately after surgery how you would expect in a macular hole.
Very true. It is something like a traction retinal detachment. When you leave it and then over a period of time it slowly settles down. It acts like that.
And when you have a very large optic pit, or if you have a double pit, then I think doing a laser around that would be damaging, because you would be, surrounding almost the entire disc with the laser. So probably in this situation, better not to do laser. But if you have a small optic pit and just a small area where you suspect the leakage, probably laser would be a good idea.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Thank you, Dr. Kshitij. That was exciting discussion. Next, I would request Dr. Sangeet Mittal to talk about diabetic TRDs. He has devised a new instrument called the Arrow, and he would be demonstrating that along with some excellent surgical demonstration of diabetic TRDs. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Manish. I'm sharing my screen now. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
So I'm just playing the video. It is an in
जिस दिन एक गोली उतर गई खोपड़ी में, जितना भेजा है सब बाहर निकल आएगा। और ठाकुर आओ।
और जब तक मैं जिंदा हूँ, गब्बर से कहना तुम इस गांव से एक दाना भी नहीं ले जा सकते।
कौन रोकेगा हमें? तुम?
हाँ, मैं और मेरे आदमी।
ये आदमी?
और तुम्हारे सर पर खेल रही है कालिया, नजर उठाकर देख लो।
तो बस
तुम्हारे लिए काफी है।
Arrow is a disposable cannulated MVR-like instrument. It is shaped like a spear in the front with pointed tip and sharp lateral edges. This is used for dissection of membranes in PTR or retinal detachment. It has got a small opening just behind the sharp tip. The needle can be connected to the extrusion pump through a handle which can be sterilized and reused. The opening helps in removing excessive blood while dissecting membranes. Also, it can be used for hydro or visco dissection of membranes by applying proportional reflux.
(22 female, presented with decrease of vision in both eyes. Her best corrected visual acuity was accurate PR in right eye and no perception of light in left eye. She was diagnosed to have proliferative diabetic retinopathy with tabletop tractional retinal detachment in right eye. As the patient was one-eyed, she was advised to undergo vitrectomy surgery under extremely guarded prognosis.
So this case was done only, I think, 1 week to 10 days before. And she has already started seeing counting fingers at about 1 meter. So this is my case.
So I think that's very brave and, bordering for mortal souls like me, it's bordering on insanity to try and do such a case. That Arrow is a brilliant instrument. I would like to have comments from Dr. Neeraj sir on management of these such cases and such video.
Beautiful video shown by Sangeet. And I think he's rightly shown, like in cases of such fibroscular proliferation, which is deeply embedded in the retina, bimanual approach is a better approach because you have the light from the chandelier, and using of 2 instruments by doing delamination and segmentation of these membranes is of paramount importance. And such cases, you are likely to have less bleed than you do by manual approach because you are in the right plane, and you cause least trauma to the retina, and you're not pulling much onto retina, and less chances of any iatrogenic retinal break formation also. So it was a wonderful video, and using this instrumentation is phenomenal.
Dr. Preetham, are you there? Dr. Preetham? I think Dr. Preetham is busy. Madam, your comments, please.
Yeah, very interesting video, Sangeet, and very interesting instrument. I would like to ask, what do you think are the specific advantages of this instrument over scissors that we are using routinely?
Yeah, 2 things. One is like using the scissors, you have to press the scissor, then release it, press it. The movement of the hand in this case is just a to and fro motion of your hand, nothing much. So it is better, the control is better. And secondly, using a scissor in your non-dominant hand, the left hand is very difficult, but because the movement is very easy, you can use it in both the hands. Either way, you can use it. So I think these are 2 main advantages over the scissor with this instrument.
I think when you use the scissors, it actually gives a crushing action. So because of the crushing, the bleeders they stop. But here you are giving a sharp cut to the membrane, and so there is a possibility that the bleeder can bleed.
On the contrary, I have found that the bleeding is less with this instrument rather than with the scissors. Sometimes because cutting it with the scissors, you tend to cut very close to the retina, and you cut the vessel also, and that bleeds. But here you are just separating those things, and the vessels generally they don't get cut. They just only the new vessels they cut. The major vessels they don't just they stay behind.
I think the aspiration hole in that
the aspiration also helps. If there is a small bleed, you can also aspirate that during the dissection. Yeah.
I think that would be the good advantage. If you connect it to an aspiration line and use the active suction, it will be even better. Yeah.
Yes.
DAD ma'am, I just want to add up, like even these membranes, we do use cutter also for dissecting the membrane through the plane and cutting it simultaneously, the way Sangeet was doing.
Manish sir, we had a question from Chetan Rao sir.
Yeah, Chetan Rao asked whether Avastin was given
Yes, Avastin was given, and that was the reason why the patient had a break. Before we started operating, I just noticed on the table that there was a break. I think that was induced by Avastin only, preoperative Avastin.
Okay. Right, sir. Let's go on to next presentation by Dr. Deepak Agarwal. Dr. Deepak Agarwal is a retina consultant from Patna. He has done his VR fellowship from Arvind Eye Hospital. He is owner of Harihar Eye Center at Patna. I'll be sharing his video.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, doctor, you are audible. Please let me know when I should.
Yeah, audio is also there in this message. Can you switch on the audio?
I'll try to. If it's audible, then otherwise you can give commentary. I'll make the 100%. I'll start the video now.
Yeah.
Please let me know if it is audible.
Yeah, it is. So I'll just brief that this was a case of a serial buckling which was done in a charitable hospital and was.
Go ahead,
Can
Dr.
you increase the volume?
You give a background so that then I can play the video.
Yeah. So this was a scleral buckling which was done in a charitable hospital, and after 3 weeks it was referred because it had developed suprachoroidal hemorrhage or choroidal detachment with total hyphema. So initially the pressures were high as per the record, and patient was started on oral steroid. And again, this patient was taken up for vitrectomy 3 weeks after the scleral buckling. And at this time, the pressures had actually come down to almost 4 millimeters. That is, pressures have become very low. So can you play the video?
Yeah.
Scleral buckling with subretinal fluid drainage 2 weeks ago before he was referred here for further management. As can be seen here, the cornea is hazy with descendant membranes cold with total hyphema, and the eye was soft. These scan showed choroidal detachment with vitreous hemorrhage with total retinal detachment. It must be remembered that once there is a choroidal detachment, the eye is totally shut down till the choroidal infusion is taken care of. After a paracentesis was done, all the blood from the anterior chamber was washed. As the cornea was hazy and cataract appeared hard, a decision to go ahead with small incision cataract surgery with intraocular lens implantation was made. There is absolutely no red glow with a soft eye, which made the surgery quite difficult. Infusion cannula is secured here, but it was not turned on. A sclerotomy is done 3.5 millimeters away from the limbus in the supranasal quadrant, and one can see the egress of deep yellow fluid due to the xanthochromic nature of the infusion. The infusion is now turned on after confirming that it is in the vitreous cavity and not in the suprachoroidal space. And after core vitrectomy was done, one can see that the posterior hyaloid is quite adherent to the underlying detached retina. And with difficulty, a PVD was induced at the posterior pole, and the posterior hyaloid was cut part by part. Now one can see the detached retina quite well. PVD was further induced in the periphery, and the posterior hyaloid was again cut part by part, keeping in mind that the detached retina is not cut. PFCL was injected to flatten the retina. Some subretinal blood in the inferior part of the retina, just below the macula. The break is seen here, which is well supported by the buccal. Endo laser to the break and 360-degree all around was done. Exchange of PFCl for air is being done. Exchange of air for silicone oil is being done. The cannulas are removed and conjunctiva is closed with 7-0-Vicryl. This is the 1 month post-operative picture, and one can see that the cornea has cleared quite well, and the fundus shows that the retina is well attached with a good buccal height. Surgeons are sometimes too quick to declare some of the although much can be done. As seen here, we were able to salvage this eye.
That was a very difficult and brilliantly done case, Dr. Deepak. Congratulations to you. Is Dr. Preetham here? Dr. Preetham, are you around? Okay. Dr. Rupak, can you please comment on this case?
Karanji, can the timer be set to 3 minutes, please? Thank you.
Dr. Rupak, are you there? Are you around?
Yes, he's there.
Yeah. Dr. Rupak, would you like to comment on this?
This is an excellent case. There is no doubt about that. But, I missed in between two parts in between. Connectivity problem is there. So what I believe is that suprachoroidal hemorrhage is a rare, but it's one of the grave complications in this kind of situation. But yes, can be managed the way Dr. Deepak has done this.
Yeah. I hope DAD madam is there. Madam?
Yes, I feel suprachoroidal hemorrhage in any situation is a difficult thing to manage. And in this situation, it was quite, I think, extremely complicated with this buccal done previously and also the retinal totally detached. So I think the congratulations to Dr. Deepak Agarwal, very well managed. Only thing is probably because of the previous buccal, it might be a little difficult for you to drain the choroidals if there is any adhesions, and that may require a little bit of dissection. But good, well managed. Manish, you are muted.
Dr. Unni Krishnan, are you around? Did you see the video? Could you give your comment on this? I think Dr. Unni is busy in his OT. I think with that, we will go on to our last case. I'll be presenting a case of dislocated sutured IOL. So this was a patient that I had done about 10 years before, and then he came with dislocation when one of the sutures gave way. I'll just play the video. Is the video, can you see the video?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen, sir.
Is it audible?
It's audible and visible both, sir.
Using 9-0 or 10-0 Prolene suture is a preferred technique of many surgeons. We present a case where a patient had undergone sutured SFIL almost 10 years back, presented with subluxation following previous trauma. Nasal haptic had subluxated, however, temporal haptic was in place. Intraoperatively, localized conjunctival opening was done. Small retained intraocular oil bubble was removed with cannula. Partial thickness scleral groove was made on the middle side, about 1.5 millimeter from the device. The infusion cannula was fixed in inferotemporal quadrant. The haptic of the IOL was lifted onto iris using microcapsular axis forceps. Broken suture was retrieved and freshened. Temporal paracentesis was made using the NPR plate. A 9-0 Prolene suture on straight needle was passed through the scleral groove, and then it was passed through eyelet on haptic of the IOL. After manipulating the position of haptic close to the needle. The 9-ohm Prolene suture was externalized through temporal paracentesis. It was passed back into the anterior chamber. And then it was railroaded out of the eye using 26 gauge bent needle passed through the scleral groove. It was passed over the haptic. And then the knot of Prolene suture was tied in 3-1-1 fashion, and it was buried into the scleral groove. At conclusion of the surgery, infusion cannula was removed and conjunctiva was repositioned. Paracenteses were hydrated to achieve watertight wound closure. On 5th postoperative day, patient had round pupil, well-centered IOL and BCVA of 6/9 with -1 cylinder at 90 degrees. In conclusion, internal refixation of subluxated suture IOL can be done using this simple technique. It is minimally traumatic procedure and it reduces surgical time as well as cost of the surgery. Thank you for your kind attention.
So this was a in nowadays of glueless, flapless and sutureless surgeries. These are rare cases which were done many years back, and now they come with subluxation. So this was how I managed to put the lens back. But I remember Dr. D.A.D. Madam doing lasso technique when we were doing fellowship for these cases. So Madam, could you just comment on this video and explain your technique as to how we could have done it, the lasso technique?
Yeah, so you have managed the case very well, and probably this is what I also used to do a few months back. It's very common to have this dislocation of the sutured lenses because the Prolene gets degraded and then the suture the lens can dislocate. But very often what happens is that if you suture one haptic, the other haptic may give way after some time. So generally it is better to do both the haptics if possible. And the second tip is I would feel that instead of putting the haptic into the AC, it is better to leave it in the anterior vitreous cavity or even in the vitreous, because it is easier to pass the suture in the anterior vitreous cavity. So that Prolene needle, you can hold the IOL with one hand and pass the Prolene needle in the anterior vitreous quite easily. And second thing is nowadays I use a Gore-Tex suture for even this kind of fixation. So either the Gore-Tex suture can be passed. In that situation, you can keep the IOL on in the anterior chamber and pass the Gore-Tex suture right through the hole of the haptic. Or you can even tie the Gore-Tex suture onto the Prolene suture and then pass it like a railroad, exactly like how you have done. A similar way, but use the Gore-Tex at the end of the Prolene suture. So this is also quite good. And I firmly believe in sutured IOLs. So I do this kind of technique. So good, very well.
And about your lasso technique, Madam, it's very difficult to.
Generally, lasso I do for IOLs which do not have the eyelet on the haptic. So if there is no eyelet, then there is you can use the lasso loop to hook the IOL and put the lasso around the haptic. But if there is a hole in the haptic, then you utilize that hole to thread the suture. But lasso is also a very good option. You can just make the lasso pass this haptic through that and tighten it. So that is a good option.
Yeah. Dr. Sangeet, Dr. Rupak, please go ahead.
I fully agree with ma'am, and we all, those who are doing this kind of suture technique, we have all come across like this situation, and we exactly manage the way Dr. Manish has handled it. The only thing is that if we have both the sutures cut due to trauma, so I have come across in those kind of situations, then it is, then what I did is to take the whole lens into SE and then pass the similar way. But the trick is here that you just pass the opposite. So suppose the left-sided flap you have made spiral flap. The left-sided suture you pass through in the AC where the right side eyelet is there. Then it is technically it is easier, and then you rotate of 180 degree and put the lens back. Am I clear? So like here, the side where the Manish's suture was broken, so that side only he has sutured. And if the both side is both the things is both the sutures are broken, then I have taken it into AC and did the similar thing, but exactly on the opposite side. So the straight suture manipulation becomes much easier.
Can we stop the buzzer, please?
Okay, just one explanation or a couple of points. For this case at primary surgery, I have done thorough vitrectomy, so I didn't have to do it again because I was sure this was my own surgery and I had done thorough vitrectomy. So just infusion cannula was put. Secondly, the suture, the knot on other side was very densely stuck. Trying to undo that and remove the IOL would probably have resulted in a problem for me with the intraocular hemorrhage or things like that. So I was mentally prepared that if the suture on other side came unstuck, in that case I would have to put the it would be like doing the whole surgery all over again and putting both sutures back again. I hope we have pleasure of Dr. Preetham Suman being logged in. Are you there, Dr. Preetham? No, I think he is still busy in OPD. Dr. Sangeet sir, would you like to?
Yes, Manish, one small comment on your case. What I would have done a little different. I would have used the flange technique in this patient. What you can do is you can cauterize one end of the suture. You take a 5-0 Prolene in that case, and that will disintegrate. It will last more longer time. And so what you can cauterize one end of the suture, then you just take the needle, pass it through the hole in the haptic, and then through the 26 gauge needle which you have introduced from the other side, you just bring the suture end out and then again do another cautery over the suture, and then it can be fixed like that also.
I think it's I believe it's called as Carabao technique or something like that.
Canabrava.
Yeah. Yes.
Canabrava is the
Canabrava. Yes.
It's a modification of your Yamane technique using this Prolene suture, thicker Prolene suture.
Okay. But if that also disintegrates, then there is a problem.
It's generally a 5-0 Prolene, so it takes a longer time. The 10-0 and 9-0 disintegrates faster.
Okay, I think with that we have come to end of our session. We have presented 7 videos encompassing different retinal conditions. And
we still have a lot of time, 20 minutes.
We can play Sholay again.
I wish I had another.
Do you think the discussion is less on virtual mode?
But we wanted to give adequate time for discussion. So I think we can. We have completed well in time. I think our hall coordinator, Mr. Nikhil, would be happy with us. So.
In fact, I'm very happy. If I had a possible reward, I would make sure that the entire team gets it. A party and a pool, maybe somewhere in the hills, and that's something which I am missing.
Manish sir, we have a lot of time for discussion on some retina, please. So can we have it?
Not on the vacation part. Am I right, Dr. Priya?
Okay. So can I ask my co-presenters as to their take on today's session, and if we are to do it again, would they like something different? What were your takeaways from today's session? Dr. Sangeet?
It was a nice session. I think you have designed it, and I think we should have more of these in future. It's just like the Retina Awesome meeting that sometimes attend. wanted to say something in one of the videos. I don't remember which one, and I forgot what I wanted to say. Can you just enumerate the videos?
The videos that we played were macular buckle video by Dr. Anshu. Then there was hemorrhages, intraocular hemorrhage intraoperative by Dr. Unnikrishnan. There was double optic disc pit by Dr. Kshitij.
Yeah, yes. Now I remember. So on the optic disc pit, we were discussing about the use of laser. One thing I would always do a laser is when your SRF is reaching the optic disc. You see, if your SRF is isolated from the disc, it's okay, you don't do the laser. But if your SRF is reaching the optic disc margin, I will definitely do a laser at that point, because I've seen the recurrences are more common in those patients. So in those patients, if you do a laser around the optic disc pit or the optic disc, those patients recurrence. That's what I want.
Okay.
Yeah. I would like to, one more question regarding Dr. Abhishek Kotre's video. So that is absolutely fine. I just wanted to have the opinion from the house. If doing vitrectomy and putting subretinal injection vis-a-vis just pneumatic displacement by in a non-vitrectomized eye and anti-VEGF. So I mean anti-VEGF plus C3FH vis-a-vis vitrectomy with subretinal injection. If Dr. Abhishek is there.
Yeah. Dr. Abhishek had to go for another session he had in another hall. So, but I think Dr. Sangeet does a lot of these cases, so he would be.
I think, Rupak, if the submacular is not too old, then I would do a pneumatic vitrectomy. Pneumatic retinopexy type of just injecting gas and some TPA, and that patients certainly do well. But if the submacular hemorrhage has become old, in our scenario, we generally deal with those patients who come after about 15-20 days later. In those cases, I've seen those pneumatic vitriolysis does not work as good as a subretinal TPA injection.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, the question comes to how much thickness of the retina of the blood in the submacular area would you like to take into consideration before deciding any treatment protocol?
If it is a small submacular hemorrhage, I won't even touch the patient. Just let it absorb on its own. And usually they do it, do absorb. But if it is a large macular hemorrhage, you can say about more than 2 to 3 days diameters, I generally go in and operate.
Does it have with anything of the thickness of the blood? So what I've seen is usually in comparison with the, if we compare with the retinal thickness, so on an average is 250 to 300.
I don't have any data on that, and I don't know. I just see the size of the hemorrhage, and if it is old hemorrhage, I plan to operate and do a subretinal TPA. If it is a fresh hemorrhage and the size is less, you can do a pneumatic displacement of the submacular hemorrhage. But if it is a very small hemorrhage, I don't even touch the hemorrhage. Let it absorb.
Rupak, a few years back, we have done a retrospective case analysis of patients who had intravitreal TPA with gas versus subretinal TPA with gas. And I think Dr. Ekta Rishi, she collected the data and it has been published in, I think probably in IGO or one of the journals. So in that article, what was apparent was that there is not much difference in the outcome in the two groups, whether you do intravitreal TPA with gas or you do subretinal TPA with gas. So both have shown almost comparable outcome. So even if you are giving intravitreal TPA, it does penetrate through the intact retina. So you don't have to worry about the penetration. And the thickness of the, of course, if there is a very large subretinal hemorrhage thickness, like great mounds of subretinal hemorrhage, that may take longer time to dissolve and that may probably require a higher dose of TPA. Maybe you can try subretinal TPA in this situation, but moderate to mild hemorrhages will work well with both techniques. The only thing is precaution is that subretinal TPA is involved with some complications, like how you saw in Abhishek's video. You can end up with excessive bleeding. You can end up with retinal tear, detachment. So that way it has to be done with little caution. Comparatively, intravitreal TPA, there's not much complications. You can just inject and leave it. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that publication from SN. So that's why I raised this topic. So because that is by doing a vitrectomy and going into subretinal space is not a very easy thing and to do always. So once you like the similar case what Dr. Abhishek has faced. So the complication arises, then the outcome may be compromised. So that's why if we do only non-vitrectomized eye, you can try with this. If it does not, if it goes there by another 3-4 days, if the patient maintains proper positioning, by 3-4 days, majority of the cases, you do see that there is a good resolution from them, good displacement from the macular area at least. So probably that I will take it in this way. Probably we can try of doing this technique first. If it doesn't work, then probably we'll go. And obviously, what Dr. Sangeet was telling, in older cases where there is a clot and the blood is already started getting degenerated. So maybe those cases we will be taking up. But again, the question comes after 7 days, usually the photoreceptor degeneration starts. So how much that will have the effect of doing a subretinal surgery?
I would like to ask one question to everybody.
Yeah.
Take on subretinal hemorrhage because of trauma, post-traumatic subretinal hemorrhage, to use TPA or just putting a gas or a combination of both?
I have a good experience of doing only C3F8 in this kind of cases for pneumatic displacement. Only point I would like to here mention that most of the patients here may be associated with traumatic neuropathy. So if you see the amount of the blood and the vision is, counting finger or even less than counting finger. So probably if you feel there is a mismatch, I sometimes do give a course of steroid as well, which I got a better result.
But combining TPA and gas both, or only gas?
No, only gas.
Only gas.
But that is for the pneumatic displacement, but concurrently treating the traumatic neuropathy as well. That's what for the visual outcome I'm talking about.
Correct.
Actually, traumatic subretinal hemorrhages are much better. They have got a good outcome. So if you have a thin subretinal hemorrhage in traumatic case, you can just simply do a gas dislocation of whatever. But if you have, say, ARMD or a PCV or something with massive hemorrhage, then I think maybe you can combine with TPA also.
TPA, ma'am. Right, ma'am. Thank you.
Dr. Priyam, please let us know when we should wrap up,
right? Sir, the scheduled timing is 12:55.
Okay.
But sir,
we have five minutes of more discussion that we can put in.
Absolutely, sir.
I would like to have a comment from Dr. Unni, his takeaways from the session today.
As usual, it was a very meticulous performance and arrangement by Manish. If I had to put a comment, I would say that it would be nice if we could have a primary discussion per video and have one person start off in a bit more structured way, that is points to be highlighted. And then the rest of the panel would join in. It would give a little bit of structure and flow to the process. That's all. Otherwise, nowadays, everything Manish touches in complications seems to be gold.
I didn't. Okay, I'll take the first part of the comments and apply it next time if I'm doing a session. Thank you, Dr.
I think this time the time was very short. You see that we got the notification so late. So in this short time, I think good job has been done, Manish.
Thank you, madam. Dr. Kshitij, your comments, your takeaways from the session.
Excellent session. Very interesting videos by everyone. It was a very enriching and to hear from Dhanashree and it was very enriching.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Anshu.
Right.
You're muted, Dr. Anshu.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, so good videos. Got a lot to learn from my seniors as well as my colleagues. And basically, one thing I wanted to comment about was that bleeding part in Uni's case. You know that it happens because while peeling the ILM, when he was moving his ILM forceps, if you drag the ILM for long, like if you want to peel it for a long, like even in cataract surgery, if you want your CCC to go a long way, it is the most common chance you have a rhexis extension. Similarly, if you kind of peel the ILM for a long way, your forceps goes out of the view and you can hit the retina and cause a hemorrhage over there. Again, there were some changes in the ILM forceps in some of the models in which the ILM forceps end was somewhat angulated in some newer models and which had more chances of these kind of bleeds. So overall, an enriching presentation by all of you. Thank you.
May I ask you the cost of macular buckle?
I'm sorry, you're not audible clearly.
Yeah, the cost of the buckle, macular buckle, how much did it cost?
It used to come from FCI. Now the FCI has been taken over by the Zeiss. So I believe when I procured it, it was around 5,500 or 6,000 rupees as far as I remember.
There is one more.
Yeah. Do you do any
one more
marking?
Company who supplies it of around 7,500.
Dr. Deepak,
yes.
Word from you, quick comment, please, before we wrap
Sure.
up.
Definitely, all the videos were very enriching. Especially, I learned a lot from Dr. Anshu also and Dr. Uni method of putting tricot. Actually, that was the first time I've seen someone do that to arrest the bleeding, and probably I would also try it next time if I have it. Otherwise, normally we would raise the bottle height and put in a gas to tampen out the blood. But putting tricot is a good novel idea and should be tried. Yeah.
Okay, I think with that, I think we have come to end of our session. We should wrap up before we are kicked out by the hall coordinator. So let's wrap. I would like to thank you all for joining and helping me out with this session at such a short notice. I would like to thank all the panelists for taking out time of their OPDs and OTs and being present here, and all the presenters for showing their work, showing complications in some cases. Thank you all for being here. On a personal note, I would like to say that me, Deepak and Anshu, we were roommates in our MBBS days. We are same batch and roommates in our MBBS days. And luck could have it, all three of us have landed up doing vitreoretinal surgery. So
inspired by you.
Inspired by Manish, yes.
And Dr. Uni and Dr. Rupak, I have had pleasure of doing fellowship with them. So it has been a fantastic experience arranging this program. And I would like to thank I would like to thank AIOS and Dr. Partha Biswas for giving me this opportunity. Before wrapping up, can I just request everybody to put on their videos? I would like to take a quick snap before just for a minute.
Photo session.
Yeah. Somebody is sharing the video. Can you? Yes. Thank you.
All of you look into the camera. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you all for.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Manish.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manish.
Thank you. I thank everyone for joining in for the wonderful videos discussion. And thank you also. Thank you. Thank you,